Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Marked Out Radio. I'm Sean.
And I'm Dana.
We had quite an interesting week this week. We had the first ever, I guess you would call them in-house signings, huh? So in our attempt at honestly pinning down as many of these WWE ID talents as we possibly could, sort of as a last-minute thing, we ended up having two of them right at my dining room table. It was kind of strange, no?
I mean, a little bit. Probably more so for you since it's your domain. And it's only a place I've been, 10 times. So, I mean, for you, it's probably stranger than it was for me.
So, so this week we had on Monday, Bryce Donovan come in. And then on Tuesday, it was Aaron Rourke. They seemed pretty happy to be there.
Yeah, I think they had a great time. The product looks really, really good. I think everything came out great. It was just cool chatting it up with them about the ID program a little bit, finding out a little bit more than the public was, already aware of. They both came suited, a nice marked out term, in their WWE ID track jackets, which was a nice little added bonus for the photo ops and the proof pics, I thought.
Yeah, I just think that whole ID concept is fascinating because it's funny. There are people online who are complaining that this is just WWE's way of locking up talent who, has a chance of being successful. I really look at it as an opportunity for these talents to drive up their bargaining value a little bit. One of the things that both of them were pretty open about is that, if and when they do receive a money offer, WWE has the first right of refusal on them, but that first right of refusal really only accomplishes driving their bargaining power up. It just means that if someone other than WWE wants to sign them, then they have to give them a little bit of a better deal. So they're going to make more money either way you look at it, which is great.
Yeah, and if anything, it keeps other companies that maybe were using talent to excess on a per diem basis for like Dark and shows like that without having the need to give them a contract. Maybe this lights a fire under other companies to sort of, it's a lot easier to pay someone per diem and just sort of string them along and use them when you want. So if I don't see any way this is a loss for the talent. I think the talent benefits big time from this.
Yeah, so we have a ton of stock going up on Facebook and on eBay, and we have more coming real soon, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. So you also did another private signing with Warlord and Barbarian. Those two, I guess they started in the 80s, right? Those stalwarts, and they're still around.
They are. They're still alive. They're still kicking. I did those through K&S. I wasn't there because Ken loves doing those like 11 a.m. on a Monday signings. I'm not taking a day off to do that. But all my stuff made it to Ken by way of Brian, and it's all done perfectly. I have stock on the Warlord, which I'll be posting soon, the Target Elite, greatest hits figure. I have a few of those, very limited. They look great. They'll be going up later today. But all in all, that was a successful dealings with K&S as usual.
So there's a little bit of news in our hobby this week. There's a couple of stories that are interesting. I guess we'll start with the positive one first. Big event, which runs in Suffolk County in Brentwood, New York. I think their next show is in March.
Correct, March.
Yeah, it's in March. Yeah, I mean they just added a couple. They just added Rampage Jackson as a headliner to their show, who I think is a great name. Really hasn't been around that much. Tremendous UFC name. Was in that A-Team movie, and is just to me. I don't know if that's everyone's draw, but for me, Rampage is a pretty cool draw. And Monster Mania that same weekend, not to be outdone, added Freddie Highmore, who's a pretty big name. He has a couple of big TV shows under his belt. He was Bates Motel, right? And he was also the show with the doctor. What's the name of it?
Is it The Good Doctor?
The Good Doctor. There you go.
Yeah,
that starring vehicle for him. So that's a pretty it's a pretty big name, and he really hasn't done a heck of a lot as far as public signings go. So that's pretty cool. And so you see
Yeah,
the cons are really kicking it into high gear as we start up the spring season with some big
I'm
names.
just hoping the Freddie Highmore ad signals Vera Farmiga to complete the Bates Motel reunion, and then to hopefully also get Patrick Wilson in for a Conjuring reunion, which I've been calling for years, because it makes too much sense not to. He is fan friendly, Patrick Wilson. He meets fans on his own time on the street, and he's nice as could be. So the idea that they have not done the con circuit yet just blows my mind.
Yeah, hopefully you finally get your wish. So then there are a couple other things going on in the industry this week that are interesting. So first up, there's yet another Dylan Hines scandal. Or this one, I'm not sure entirely rests at his feet. It's really an interesting. It's an interesting extension of what we talked about last week with regard to the RVD bookings. So there's an issue going on with Matt Riddle. Now, if you're not familiar, Matt Riddle has had a career that, pardon the dad pun, has been riddled with controversy. He was on the Ultimate Fighter in UFC. Then he did pretty well as a UFC fighter, and then he transitioned to WWE, where he was pretty successful. But there were accusations of various domestic issues, relationship issues with him. There were some drug issues with him, and he was ultimately released as more or less for being, because he was a pretty good worker and a pretty good draw. So I think that he was just more trouble than he was worth for them. I actually didn't work with him. You did, and you said he was nice as can be, right?
Oh yeah. He's always been nice. Like first, my first dealings with Riddle were back during the Evolve days. Like before marked out collectibles was really a thing, but I would still sort of play that game in my head of who's gonna make it. And he was one that I needed to get. And he was always at those shows. He'd be hanging out by the bar, just taking free photo ops. He was always extremely fan friendly. And at the signing that he was at Wrestling Universe, so that we had, the private, he was awesome, completely awesome. I think honestly, he's a victim of just being in pro wrestling in the 2020s. Like he would, all his little scandals and controversies. If you dropped him in 1992, I think he would have been fine. No one would have batted an eye. But in this era, he seems more trouble than he's worth.
And so the gist of it is, it appears that Dylan Hines had him booked to do a match, an indie show, and a meet and greet. And the exact terms of their deal are a little bit hazy because you're dealing with, people communicating over text who are just hopelessly inarticulate. And the short version of it is that Dylan did the booking through Riddle himself, which is, with a lot of wrestlers, it's actually very, very common that you get their number and you just communicate directly with them. It's just, there's no need for a middleman. A lot of them do their own bookings, and pretty close, a couple days or even the day before, it was very, very close to the booking itself. Some random number reached out claiming to be Riddle's manager. Turned out Dylan Hines verified it was Riddle's new manager and started making all kinds of demands, such as a deposit. And really it was just the deposit that was the sticking point that turned into the deposit was late, and then the flight was missed, and then it was just this whole cascading series of unfortunate events, ultimately, which led to Riddle not making the booking. And on one hand, it changed. And I think this is what we talked about before the show, is that on one hand, changing the terms of a deal and negotiating with a new person the day before or 2 days before is just ridiculous, and it's unprofessional. On the other hand, it may have been where reputational issues are causing wrestlers now to get representation in order to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like as we've covered with Dylan Hines. I don't blame someone for maybe wanting a little assurances that you're going to be paid when you've heard lots of different people have not been paid. But he made this deal, Riddle. He, a day or a few days before, I'm not a big fan of someone changing the terms right before, whether it's Dylan Hines or not. Like, that's just bad business to me.
Yeah, and I mean, if he wanted a deposit, then the way you do it is you go through your original booking method. Just changing the booking method so close to the show, coming from just some random number from some person. It's unprofessional, and it definitely speaks to sort of the more hassle than he's worth reputation that Riddle has, because who wants to deal with shenanigans at the last minute? You want to deal with someone who is getting on an airplane, making their booking, and not complaining about it, and not giving you any stress, because those kind of bookings, the day of, you're going to have various stressors. And so who wants to even worry about those last minute things? You've already committed to a date. You've already committed to a fee. That should be enough.
Yeah. Like, it's baseball free agency right now. You don't agree to a deal, then hire a new agent, and then go back to the negotiation table and change it. Like, that's not how things go. And as much as I'd love to sit here and make jokes about Dylan Hines, I don't see Dylan Hines being at fault here. I just don't. I think, as I said, maybe Riddle was protecting himself from the reputation he was working with, but he made the deal. He chose to work with this guy. So at that point, Riddle should just say a prayer and follow through on the deal as made. And then going forward, have this new representation handle deals differently. That's fair, but you can't change a deal you already made in the 11th hour.
And another callback to what we discussed in last week's episode. Then in the comments of the post, Dylan Hines was talking about how he said an attorney advised him he has the right, he could sue for damages and win. And I was just rolling my eyes like, here we go again with the talk of contracts and lawsuits and all this stuff, because we all know that Dylan Hines is not suing Matt Riddle for anything. And it's just more kind of bluster from these people. But it just speaks to, the truth of it is, in this world, whether it's, and we talk about wrestlers because that's, those are the people who we know, but it really doesn't matter which area of the con you're in, or the con business you're in. There are people who they no-show bookings, they cost people money, and you don't really see lawsuits happening here because frankly, it's pretty well established that a vendor or a booker or an agent who's willing to sue talent will scare other talent away. Other talent don't want there is no shortage of people willing to do this job. There's no this is something that I'm not really sure why, but lots of people really, really, really want to waste their time on. And so if there's not one, another one will just come and take their place right away. And so there's not any lawsuits thrown out. I mean, heck, there was a very high profile cancellation not too long ago with all kinds of figures being thrown around of dollar amounts lost, and a lot of well into the 5 figures is claimed to have been lost, and there were no lawsuits there, right?
No, just court of public opinions about the only court that that's really going to get action in these types of scenarios.
And that's really how it goes. And then the third one is kind of an interesting debate, and it really sort of segues into the main topic of the show. So recently, Snoop Dogg offered up signed vinyls and signed CDs for sale through his label. And Snoop Dogg has a reputation for being a pretty good signer, isn't he?
Yeah, he's damn good, honestly, given his status.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's how friendly he is. He signs with people. He has no problem. And, a lot of people, and this is the controversy now, the first wave of merchandise came back to the fans this week, and people with significant experience with Snoop Dogg autographs and people with significant experience in the hobby are claiming that these are fake. But what's really interesting about it is there's 2 interesting things about it. Number one, there are people, usually when the heavy hitters come out and say that something is an obvious fake, it kind of is widely accepted pretty quickly. This time around, there are people really pushing back and saying, well, no, these are sit downs and we never really see Snoop sitting down, and it's not really easy enough you're not really able to tell. Now, what's interesting about that is I noticed there were people who were submitting these to Beckett, and rather than weigh in, Beckett is taking a powder. Beckett is simply refunding people's money and saying they're unable to render an opinion, which, I mean,
that's smart.
I understand why they're doing that, because Beckett does not want to start certifying things that all turn out to be fake. But at the same time, they don't want to start denying flawless sit-down autographs either. And so there needs to still be some more consensus in the public about these.
As we've explained, and honestly, I didn't even know this until I got into like dealing with these authenticators on like a more personal level. They're only able to go by the exemplars they have. Like, they're not psychics. They're not one of those drones flying over the United States that they were watching Snoop Dogg sign these. Like, they have no idea beyond exemplars. I have a Jonah Hill autograph from the set of Get Him to the Greek back in, I don't even know what year, 2008 probably. It's probably the neatest signature you'll ever see of him, every single letter. And now he's the guy that gives out the like pre-stamped business card of "You met Jonah Hill and it was a real disappointment." Like, if I submitted that to any of these places, I'm sure they would either reject me or render it, that they couldn't make a decision, because I can't imagine there's any exemplars like mine. And that's what this is. How can they honestly decide? So it just makes me respect Beckett and the whole concept of authentication even more, because it shows that they don't want to be on the wrong side of something that you really can't say for sure.
Yeah, this is really, it's a really interesting one, because my first glance looking at these is these are no good. Did you look at them?
Yeah, I saw enough differences. Like, typically, we are not experts. I'm sure there will be people out there saying, well, how do you know? You're not an expert. You don't work for JSA. But there's certain tells you look for. They're like, the first letter, the last letter. There's certain things, the way letters connect. I wasn't looking super, super, super close, but I looked close enough. There's differences that to me don't sit right. There's inconsistencies. I personally wouldn't feel confident in them. But at the same time, if I was a company that authenticates autographs, I wouldn't really be rushing judgment. So it's a very interesting case.
I thought the flow looked very slow.
Yep.
I thought the S's looked very strange, given that his S's are pretty uniform. So I don't know. I mean, my instinct is that they're bad, but there's a lot of pushback, and the major groups, the major autograph groups, are kind of all going around about it. And there are certain people who are adamant that they're very obviously fake, and there are other people who are adamant that they're real. And it's just a little bit different, because normally when these things come out, consensus usually is found relatively quickly, and we're not there yet. So I always love the politics of this stuff. How do you find consensus, and who are the arbiters of consensus, and how does how do we come to an agreement collectively as a hobby? I mean, there's all kinds of interesting cases in the past where there was no consensus reached. My favorite was the Michelle Obama books. Are you familiar with the story?
I think I am. Yes.
How there are people who insist that they're auto-penned, and then there are other people who are adamant, and people who are of esteem in this hobby who are adamant that they're not, and that she has a very, very consistent autograph, and they're not auto-penned, and they can point to variations. And so that's one that I think is a really interesting one, because I've seen the evidence for both. And this is not the Michelle Obama is a little bit different, because it's a question of auto-pen versus
forged,
forged, right? Yeah, and Snoop Dogg. No one is saying Snoop Dogg is auto-penned. That's not the argument. The argument is their ghost sign, their secretarial.
Yeah, and it's definitely what I think.
Yeah, and so and they all look vastly different from each other. And so I think we'll hear in the next couple of weeks even more heavy hitters in the business weigh in, and hopefully we can reach a consensus on it. But it definitely speaks to the uncertainty of buying these things where there used to be relative certainty. We've talked about this already. You buy from the artists themselves. It's funny. I actually saw a commercial, not just like a scrolling ad, but a live video commercial of Paris Hilton, hawking her newest signed vinyl. And she's like, I signed all these. And she was like talking, and I was watching this going, holy cow. Because so humorously, the example that we used of Paris Hilton was actually her previous one. And this is a new one. And I believe this new one is also secretarial. So that's just wild to me.
I don't get how this has become normalized, that you have artists committing fraud, literal fraud. They're advertising this as being hand signed by, the artist, and they're not. And like you said, this used to be a thing where it was complete certainty. Like, imagine I go to fanatics.com right now, buy a Roman Reigns figure that's signed by the guy in the packing room. Like, that would be a scandal. That would be a big thing, a big no-no. But now it's almost like, oh, well, I got my refund, and then they're able to just redo it and do it again, and the next CD, they just do it again. It's crazy to me. I don't get how there isn't bigger pushback. I guess because it's so niche, and the majority of the people don't know or care. But it's not right, and it really takes something that used to feel like a safe slam dunk of a purchase and, cast a huge shadow of doubt to the point that I don't even want to buy them anymore.
Yeah, I'm unless it's something that was, really an incredibly worthwhile gamble, I'm not going to bother. I mean, it kills me because I know the people who took the gamble on Wicked made a small fortune, but that's kind of how it goes. Those Wicked ones that were completely beautifully signed in paint, and it just sickens me thinking about it, but that's how it goes.
Yep.
So if you're shopping for autographs, make sure to check out www.markedoutcollectibles.com or our eBay store at Marked Out Collectibles. To contact us for any reason, please email markedoutcollectibles@gmail.com or join the Marked Out Collectibles official marketplace on Facebook. All links are in the show notes on Facebook and Substack. So we actually have a merchandise table coming up. It's at the PWJ Damaged Goods show on January 26th. It's at the Mecca in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey. Doors open at 4 and bell time is at 5. They've announced a couple of matches already, and hopefully more get announced soon. They announced Charles Mason versus Steve Macklin and Nick Gage versus Justin Finn. So if you're in the area of Ridgefield Park, New Jersey, check it out and make sure to visit our table. You excited for that one?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's going to be great. Gil is doing an awesome job putting this show together. I don't even honestly know how we're going to have enough hours in the night to get everything done. We have a lot to do, a lot of signings, basically talents to be coming and going from our booth all day. It's crazy. And the card is stacked. What's announced, what isn't announced yet that I've heard. So I got to find time to actually watch some of these matches while working. So we'll see how that goes.
All right, let's get on to the main event of the evening, as they say. I've been pushing this topic for weeks, almost months now, and I finally, I think, convinced you that it's something worth talking about. But we recently we were talking about there was an article that was posted on Rack, one of the Facebook groups, and the article actually came out December of 2023, a year ago. But this article was recently posted again to Rack, and there's a lot of recent discussion about it. And it's regarding pens and just the kind of pens you use in this hobby. And frankly, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of argument, a lot of conversation about pens in this hobby, which you think like, the pen is it's a no-brainer. It's a gimme. It's stupid to talk about. And yet there's significant argument about it. So do you want to summarize what the article is about, and then we can launch into our pen discussion?
The article touched on a popular topic among street graphers. This is a thing that even when I was out in the streets on a daily basis, you would hear about it. There were certain celebrities that wouldn't sign with blue ink. Now, there were various reasons why. I remember on the street back then, you would hear, oh, they know it sells for more. There was always then there's now, this article focuses on an ability that you could sort of replicate these signatures, put them on different items, forgery concerns. I'm not honestly sure personally how forgery is any easier with blue versus black.
So the science behind it, the argument they make is so dumb that it's actually hard to like articulate how dumb it is. The argument is that
make sense.
The argument is that blue ink can be transferred to other items. But if you know anything about optics, this is just basic physics. If you turn something upside down and you try to transfer it to another object, then you get a mirror image of that thing. You don't get that thing. So like, it's just the dumbest. It's hard to even like process how anyone with half a brain can believe this is true. And yet Like many high-profile celebrities refuse to sign in blue Sharpie because of this.
And here's the reality. The only thing they really, if you were so concerned about having your signature put on things you didn't intend, what you really should be doing as a celebrity is simply not signing blanks. Because I used to do that once in a while when I was out in the street. You would keep a couple pieces of photo paper in your bag. This was like the old version of like window swaps on Funkos. You would get it signed in blue ink, in black ink, either one. And then you could throw it into an inkjet printer and you could print any picture you want over that signed piece of paper, and the signature would show up on the picture as if it was signed, naturally, which would mean I could take that Jonah Hill blank that he signed, which I actually did do, and then print the photo on it. Now, luckily for Jonah Hill, I printed a Get Him to the Greek photo that wasn't out at the time I was on the set. I could have printed it over a Hitler picture, and Jonah Hill signed a Hitler picture. I understand that. I understand the celebrity not wanting that to happen. But the blue, the black, it makes no difference. It's all about signing blanks, because you could take that signature and I guess make it like an auto pen file. You could do a lot of things with it. It's all about what you're signing, not what you're signing with, in my experience.
I think that, and there was some speculation about this, and I think the speculation is correct. There are some people who speculate that it is true, just unequivocally, that professional graphers, professional street graphers, they use blue Sharpies more than black Sharpies because there's a perception that blue Sharpies sell better. Fair?
Yes.
And so what some people speculate is that a pretty savvy agent or manager at some point or another started spreading the word that if you see blue Sharpies, you shouldn't sign for them because that means that it's a pro. And somehow that got twisted up in someone's head and got spread around that it had something to do with transferring signatures. The real reason is because they don't want people to sign for pros. They want people to sign for fans only. And fans don't care what something is signed. And you could sign it in, hot dog mustard, and a fan will be happy. And that this is a way of filtering out pros. It's turned into, however, just an insane, illogical thing that some people will encounter.
And it's one of those things that, as a result of just trying to not sign for pros and not do the blue ink, you'll see celebrities like Mark Wahlberg. That guy's got a black Sharpie in his pocket at all time. He'll pull that out, and that's what he's running with. I'm sure there's instances people have gotten him on paint, but it's few and far between. He usually takes that Sharpie out of his pocket. I've seen him do it, and he runs with that. And I think, like you said, initially that's what it was. It was just a way to sort of beat the pros. Now it's taken on a life of its own, and it's this whole scandal and conspiracy that's just not true.
So if you're going to go street graphing, the move is to either bring a nice fancy, deco or something like that to show that you're a true fan, or bring a black Sharpie. But if you bring a blue Sharpie, there's a decent, and by Sharpie we mean Sharpie marker, not a Sharpie paint pen. We'll talk about those in a sec. So just really, it's a bad idea to bring a blue Sharpie to a street event, because then you could run into, and that's, by the way, in my estimation, it's a good way of telling whether someone has a brain or not, because you'll never convince me that anyone with half a brain will believe that blue Sharpie will transfer off of an item onto other items and black Sharpie will not. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Here's what I'd like to know, and I haven't done crowded street graphing in so long. I'm genuinely not sure of this. So any of our listeners, feel free to drop a line somewhere and let us know your experience. I find it hard to believe today that coming with a deco paint pen wouldn't scream dealer just as much as a blue Sharpie. I feel like if you really want to seem like a fan, you got to come with the black Sharpie on your Funko window so it looks like just complete dog crap. And no one would ever think you're selling it. I feel like a paint at this point, paint is the new blue Sharpie as far as if you're a dealer.
I think that there's two kinds of markets we're talking about here. The guys out there who are your rough and tumble, dirty street graphers, those are using blue Sharpie on headshots, and they're churning out volume to make a living. Then there's the other ones who are the high-end graphers who use paint, who aren't using volume at all. They're doing quality. So, for example, there are a couple guys on Rack who I think are pretty much the most preeminent street graphers going today, not necessarily in terms of volume, but in terms of quality. So William Kuntz is one of them. I bought a couple of things off of. I bought the Terminator 2 Laserdisc cover that was signed in silver deco by Arnold, and there's this beautiful full signature in silver deco. It's the kind of thing that unless you have Arnold 1-on-1 or 2-on-1, you don't want to give him an item like that with silver deco, because silver deco takes a few seconds to dry. There's always the risk that it'll get demolished, Yep. But you look at this thing, and it's a high value, high super premium, high quality item. Looks stunning. I made a project out of it. Actually, it was so stunning. Because it was signed in that silver deco paint pen. And so, but also obviously, that grapher cannot do 10 or 15 per on Arnold with a silver deco. He can't juggle it all. It all gets smudged. And so he's going for the one really, really nice item, then the 5 or 6 or 7 silver Sharpie signed photos. So I think those are the two different markets. There are the people, even the people with the Funkos, they do those boards with the Funko windows taped to them, hopefully with paint signatures, but they're just not doing the kind of volume that the Radio Mans and people like him are doing.
Yeah, you're not going to hand Johnny Depp a stack of things that he has to spread out across his bus or his room and let them dry for 3 to 5 minutes. Like Radio Mans are all stacked up and put back in the bag.
Oh, there is that one guy who somehow gets Johnny Depp in paint on everything. I'm not sure. The guy who lives in England, he does that whole
Army. Thing. Oh yeah, Army Shanks. I bought my Johnny piece from him.
So there's that, and so the paint going in the street, you have to really have nerves of steel to bring paint into the street. There's no other way to say it.
I had paint over the summer at our secret spot, but I mean, that was about as quiet as it could get, and even that was actually a challenge where you had to.
As did I. Look,
yeah,
I got my Spider-Man poster done in that that blue deco, and it does have a slight dot on it from where Marissa Tomei, did her thing. And I did have the white paint for Jonathan Groff, but that particular spot was so dead that we were all right with the paint.
Yeah.
And frankly, even with the Andrew Garfield, I probably should have used Sharpie instead of paint, given how my poster was rolled around the thing and stuff. But listen, I'm all about it did work out in that way. And so there's lots of things to talk about and things to figure out when it comes to pens. It depends on the item you're getting signed. So I know that we have talked a lot about what we want to offer on the items that we sell. Because one of the things that we've talked about is that we don't want to sell items that are substandard. We don't want to sell items that look cheap. That's not the. I'm never going to be. We were talking about this in the car wherever we were driving. I think it was from Macaulay Culkin, that we are never going to be Walmart. We're never going to, or that kind of analogy. We're never going to have a warehouse. We're never going to stock large quantities of things. That's not. I have no interest in that. That's not something that is appealing to either of us on any level. We're into quality, and I would rather sell a handful of premium items, really, really nice things, than do volume on cheap things. And I think that that's something that we're both in agreement about, right?
Absolutely right. The idea of you actually made me, because I'll share our conversation for the listeners. When you start a business and you're working on a business, you always have that goal of bigger, 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 bigger. And you said to me one day, you're like, we're only going to get so big with collectibles because do you ever envision having a warehouse space and hiring people to pack orders for you? And I never thought of it like that. And that really sort of shook the way I viewed things. And now I think I'm comfortable. I think there's a lot of room to grow, and I'm excited to do it. But I'm recognizing I'm not gonna take on, as a teacher and you as a teacher, I'm not gonna take on a warehouse and being an employer of workers. And no, so yeah, it's all about just creating is, in my opinion, consistently the absolute best product on the market of whoever we're dealing with. And maybe our prices are a little higher in some cases because it's less quantity, it's higher quality. But that's exactly who I want to sell to, the buyer that wants that exclusive edit that no one else has that just looks better.
So, or really, what that means is, what that translates to is that we spend a lot of time negotiating with each other as to what types of pen we're going to use on our items. This is something that to normal people they probably would not. If we recorded those conversations, I mean, most people would just shake their heads in confusion and or disgust. But we really do try and figure out, well, what the heck do we use, And so there are a couple of major players in the pen game, for lack of a better word, and we'll talk about who those players are and what their products are, and which ones of those we use and which ones of those we stay away from, and what circumstances we use them in versus don't. And so you have Sharpie markers. We've talked about those a little bit. Sharpie markers, pretty much the only colors that you should use of Sharpie markers are blue and black. Can you explain to people why that is?
Well, first of all, just as a little caveat for the black, I recommend a Super Sharpie if you can get one. Black Super Sharpies, to me, are just the superior black Sharpie. They're a little thicker. They will last through an apocalypse. They're excellent. They used to make blue Super Sharpies, and I think those are out of commission right now. They don't make them. But to answer your question as to why, Silver Sharpie, to me, it's like the equivalent of buying a lottery ticket. Once in a while, or at least in my experience, once in a while you open one, you sign with it, it looks great. But a lot of times it's a complete dud. It looks like trash. And when you have something on the market like a Silver Deco, which in my opinion is the most consistent and just high quality pen around, there's no reason to gamble on a Silver Sharpie.
Yeah, I mean, and with that, I'm gonna under that umbrella refer to all of the metallic Sharpies. So silver, gold, and bronze metallic Sharpies are wildly unpredictable.
Bronze sucks. That's like the worst.
There have been instances where you pull a fresh one out of the box and it's dead out of the box.
Yeah.
For no discernible reason. They're really, really, really low quality products, and you shouldn't be using them. And also, there are certain items they just won't adhere to. So I had, for example, anything that's plastic or vinyl or even leather, Silver Sharpie really doesn't adhere to very well. And so I've had older wrestling belts in the past, before paint markers were as big and I guess as ubiquitous as they are now. And I was using Silver Sharpie on them. And then at some point I switched to paint, and you could see the Silver Sharpie autographs would smudge over time. The ink would react to touch or just general abrasion from touching against other things, and the paint will not, because the paint seeps into the fabric better. And so I can't really articulate enough that you do not use metallic Sharpies under any circumstances. And that even goes for the metallic paint Sharpies are kind of bad too, but that's a whole other question. So if you're going to use Sharpie, you use black Super Sharpie, and you got to be careful, because the photo that you use matters. So for example, if you're using a photo that was printed on an ink printer at home, chances are that that's not a commercial printer, and so over time the ink, which are those inks that are organically based, those will start to chemically react with the black Sharpie. And that's a lot of home printed photos that are signed in black Sharpie will start to get those yellow halos around the signature. Do you have any like that?
I do, and that even happens with Sharpie brand paint. But interestingly enough, only certain colors, which is kind of interesting.
So can't stress enough, if you have the opportunity for a sit down signing, there's a pretty good chance that you're not going to want to use the old Sharpie markers that were mainstays of this hobby for decades. You're going to want to move on to a paint pen. And really, paint pens have look, paint markers have existed for decades. But they were really confined to like scrapbooking hobbies or various art, kind of art marker kind of thing. And only in the last couple of years have these paint markers blown up as these paint marker companies really have gone from these tiny little boutique items that would only sell to craft stores, and now they're selling them in bulk to autograph companies. And so that's kind of interesting how we have sort of we have changed the face of the marker industry as well. And so more or less there are, I guess, a handful of major players in the paint marker industry. We have Sharpie, which makes a variety of paint pens. We have Deco Color by Uchida. That's another popular brand. There's Posca, and Posca started out as a boutique art marker company, and now they are clearly marketing to the autograph community. And then finally, there's Molotov, which is similar to Posca. Were there any that I missed of these major brands?
Unless you want to cover the Elmer's ones you used to use, but no, I think that's
it's kind of funny. Yeah, so years ago, before all these brands are mainstream, I used to use Elmer's paint pens. I don't even know if they still make them anymore. Like Elmer's glue.
I don't think they do.
I haven't seen them in years, but that was what was available, and I bought them, and I used to get my stuff done in Elmer's paint pen, and I was the first. A lot of these cons, there was no one with paint pen around but me. And once people saw my stuff get done in paint pen, they would ask me to borrow my markers from me. And I actually remember quite humorously, I had done it was in the mall, I think in the mall around here. Someone set up a Hoist Gracie signing, which was extremely rare. Hoist Gracie had come up here from Brazil. He was doing other appearances. He was in the mall, and I had 2 UFC figures with me. So naturally, I got them done in this beautiful Elmer's green paint pen. Part of my collection. And after that, I got them done. That the guy who ran the signing, I don't know if he was the store owner or the booker or what. I don't remember. It was years ago. Basically, was like, I want to buy that pen from you. I want to buy that pen from you. And I'm like, how much? And he was like, $5. I'm like, dude, are you crazy? I'm not giving you my pen for $5. Not worth it. And we actually finally settled on like $20 for a half-used paint pen, which was, I think, pretty. Frankly, I was being kind of generous, because all that did was that increase the number of things that were signed in paint on the market when I could have had the only one.
Yeah.
But in any case, and what the distinction between these markers when you're thinking about what kind of marker you want to use is whether you're going to use a marker that is oil based or water based. And if this is making your head spin, I guess it should, because this is not something that I ever imagined when I first started collecting autographs. Almost 2 decades ago, I would be negotiating whether I'd be using oil or what the hell's the other word I just used? Oil or water based. That's I lost it. Oil or water based markers, and so I guess we'll start out with the water based. Because they're the ones that are controversial. Oil-based are really not controversial at all. So water-based, we use water-based paint pens all the time for signings on items that are paper. And well, I mean, you were the big proponent of that, and you sold me on it. Now I'm a convert. Why were you using those water-based Posca brand paint pens on paper products?
They just look amazing, and they seep into the surface enough where it's not an issue of chipping. And it's funny because like there's certain if you use oil, like for example, we always use Posca on our metallics. I actually learned this trick once when I was at Golden Ring headquarters with Mick Foley. And if anyone knows Mick Foley, he is extremely anal about the pens he uses. And he didn't want to use Posca on the metallics that some customer sent in. And it was a whole thing where the customer was like sending these messages to be read to Foley in the moment, like basically pleading with him to just use the Posca because it's going to look better. And I think he did a couple in the Sharpie oil based at first. That's because he was stubborn. And it like absorbs. The oil absorbs into a high gloss, whether it's metallic gloss or just gloss. But for whatever reason, the Posca doesn't. And it just looks phenomenal. Posca looks phenomenal on everything. Like you show a figure signed in Posca, it looks better than any other pen. But why don't we do figures in Posca?
So the reason why you don't do figures or really anything with a plastic surface, or anything, I guess it's a non-porous surface. You don't use Posca on those non-porous surfaces because Posca chips very, very, very easily after it dries. If you use Posca on paper, it lasts forever because the ink, the paint, the water, since its Posca is water based, it seeps in, as Dana said, and it does not actually rest on the surface. But when you use when you use Posca water based pens on, let's say, an action figure, for example, it looks stunning. But that paint just dries on the surface of that plastic, and any kind of friction whatsoever will cause that paint to chip off. And we've seen, when I say any amount of friction, we've seen instances in which someone gets something signed in Posca. It looks gorgeous. It goes into their crate. That same day, they take it out of the crate, and there's significant damage to the signature.
Yep. Do you remember the stress we had with the private signing with the Hardy Boys, and that one customer sent us in legitimately 15 figures, none of which in Defender cases, that he wanted all to be done in Posca?
Yeah, honestly, here's the problem with that. We took the money, we took the order. We probably should have declined.
Yeah.
Because
there's no way we can fulfill it. Yeah, I told him that you don't want to be using Posca without Defenders. You don't want to be using Posca on plastic. He didn't care. He said it'll be fine. And in credit to our care, there was not a single issue of damage because we were like madmen, like layering the figures in bubble wrap and putting them on top of each other. But that was stress I never want to have again.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. The beautiful thing about the counterpoint to using those Posca water-based paint pens is using Sharpie oil-based paint pens. You got to be careful when you buy Sharpie because there's a couple of different ones of their paint pens. There's the Sharpie oil-based paint pens, there's Sharpie water-based paint pens, and then there's the new formula Sharpie oil-based paint pens, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So for the longest time, Sharpie oil-based paint pens were the standard for signing on metal or plastic, because when it just bonds and it looks amazing. Does it look as bright as Posca? No. Posca looks the brightest. It's the highest quality image you can get. But Sharpie's damn near. And
when prepped correctly, yes.
And they do take a little bit more prep. They do take a little bit more time to dry. They're a little bit more initially delicate. But when Sharpies are done and they're done well, then they're permanent. And they're not going to break or crack or split or flake or any of the issues that occur when you use water-based. So, but Sharpies also are more temperamental, so if you're using a red Sharpie, for example, or an orange Sharpie, you have to really make sure the pen has been primed for 10 or 15 minutes, or else you get these weird dark streaks or dark colors, and the color is not right. And it's very hard to replicate colors with Sharpies because the tip can oxidize and the paint can oxidize. So there's all kinds of tricks to using it. But for figure, and so there's this whole debate, whether or not it's smarter to get figures done in Posca and then immediately put them into some kind of protector, whether it's a pop protector or a figure defender or something like that, or whether it's smarter to get figures done in Sharpie. Obviously, you can still put them in a protector, but there's that sort of extra psychological layer of knowing that the ink is protected. Where do you fall on this debate?
Well, that's always the big debate on the Major Pod group, where Matt and Brian always argue that don't scratch it, don't rub it, just put it in a Defender and you're good. My issue with that is, stuff happens. You can't always, get it right into a Defender. Also, on a science level, we haven't been using water-based paint for decades. Do we know if water-based paint sitting on plastic will just start chipping and cracking in 20 years just naturally? Personally, I don't. I always joke that you need like a science degree to really know which pen to use in which situation. But I mean, at my core, I do not have a science degree, so I don't know. I personally always do oil on any surface that it won't sort of absorb the water. So as much as it looks beautiful and as tempting as it is, I just refuse. I do oil on all plastics. How about you?
Same. Yeah, I'm not screwing around. In fact, when I've done mail away signings in the past, and they've used water based Sharpies. I mean, a good example is a water based Poscas. When I mailed away to Robert Englund, he used Poscas on everything, and everything came back fine. And I only have a couple of items where it makes a difference, but it aggravates me. Just the possibility of one day knowing that the ink can flake away. So they're sitting in a box and with a defender and all that, but you never know how that happens. There's also a question as to whether there's the different tip types matter. So there's three. Most of these paint pens have extra fine, fine, or medium. And what do you use?
I use fine on Funkos unless the person's signature is just so like non-existent that you need to give it some more depth. And I usually use medium on like wrestling figures. To me, extra fine is. I've yet to find a good reason to use extra fine. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, we. It's actually funny because we were at the I forget which signing we were at, and whoever brought. Oh, was the Takeshita signing where someone I guess had brought paint pens for him to use, and then when they opened them, they realized they were all extra fine instead of fine, and they couldn't use them. I had bought a package of extra fine white Sharpie paint, just thinking I would use them on something in the future. I haven't opened a single one. I think I got them very cheap. So, and so I prefer fine on everything. I still have a bunch of mediums left that I have purchased, and I'll use them. But I prefer the look of fine. That's a personal preference.
I don't know why. I don't like them on wrestling figures, and like I'm looking at them right now, I really can't articulate. I can't give you an honest scientific reason why. I just like them better medium.
And they're getting into that. A lot of this stuff is really a matter of personal preference. I mean, the acrylic, the oil versus water, there's science here, but the medium versus fine is really just a matter of personal preference. I prefer the fine. I get why people like the medium; they can be bolder, but I prefer the more intricate details that the fine can reproduce. And then, of course, I don't know if you actually hadn't heard about this. I showed you this that. Here we were carrying on about Sharpie oil-based paint markers being so incredible, and Sharpie went ahead a couple months ago and they changed their formulas. And so you need to be really careful that which formula of Sharpie oil-based paint pen you're using, because what they did was they in order to distinguish between the old formula and the new formula, they added a blue band. Oh, it's almost like this little 1/8 inch thick circle of blue that it just is a blue circle at the base of the pen that they added to all new. So if you go to Staples right now and you buy a Sharpie paint pen off the shelf, it has the new formulation. They all have those blue bands. And from what people have been saying and what evidence has been presented on the Facebook groups, that the blue bands are noticeably lower quality than the previous pens, specifically with whites, yellows, blues, and reds, where it's very, very hard to get the pen to produce the same kind of consistent, bright colors that the old ones produced. So that leads us to our last brand, I guess, who are pretty solidly reliable. No one will claim their colors are the best as far as pop. They don't pop as much as the Sharpies, and they certainly don't pop as much as the Poscas, but they seem to have the most stability, and that's Deco. And you've been on the Deco train forever.
Yeah. The Staten Island blue Deco color is, to me, that pops as good as anything any brand has. There's other colors in Deco. Like, I don't love Deco white.
Deco white does not look as good as Sharpie white. It just doesn't.
Yeah, I don't love Deco red, which again is another color from Sharpie that used to look great. That's kind of sad. I like lime green Deco. I like the rich blue. Honestly, any of the blues are good.
The light blue, the baby blue Deco looks exceptional also.
Yeah. And of course, the silver and gold, mostly silver, were like basically handed down from the heavens. Like they are just the greatest pens ever.
Yeah, those, and that's the last thing I wanted to talk about with pens is these these silver metallic. If you want anything metallic, you got to go Deco. You got to go Deco. They sell these ultra high quality silver and gold, and even bronze and rose gold. If you want to go really fancy metallic paint pens that are just that are the way to go. They look exceptional. They dry reasonably quickly, and it's very hard to argue against them, or very hard to like even think about any other pen I would use. If I wanted to use a silver or a gold, I absolutely would not hesitate. I would go straight for Deco.
Yeah, I know some street graphers still like the ever fading, not fading in pen quality, but it's fading in availability. The elements. There was like those elements silvers that you used to be able to buy at Michael's. Those look pretty good, but I mean they're not as good as Deco. But if you're on the street and you still have one that runs well, it's a little safer. It dries quicker.
Yeah, well, the elements. So I actually have a package of elements. They are nowhere near the quality of Deco. Nowhere near. I use them actually to label Christmas gifts. That's how I use it. That's how I use them for the tags on Christmas gifts. What's interesting is even the elements, they don't dry as quickly as a Sharpie. They're still a little bit slower. So I think for that extra couple of seconds, I would go for a Deco every single time.
Likewise,
I really would. And then then there's all kinds of other things going on in hobby wise in pen world. You have people who want to use they really care about color matching, and this is the thing where if you really care about color matching, if you want to make sure that the color you use is the same every time you use it, you got to go with Deco or Posca, because we have had experiences with Sharpies where we have items where the same pen was used in different spots by different talents on the item, and the color's different.
Yeah, it's all about how it's primed. Like you said, how the tip oxidizes with the paint. It's very difficult to get the exact same hue, shade of color.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really that's really it for that. I mean, and then there are the people who want like multiple colors on the same item. I mean, that's really not pen related necessarily, but we've seen instances where people were trying to go multiple colors on the same item, and then it sometimes it can look phenomenal, and other times it can look like a hot mess, and it's hard to predict until after it's too late.
Yeah, and the only other point I would like to bring up about pen choice and the surfaces and stuff would be the AEW figure bubbles. Also, the Major Bendy and Big Rubber Guy figure bubbles. For whatever reason, they have to be rigorously prepped, or else it looks all funky. It looks like kind of bubbly. It doesn't look smooth. So what I've been doing lately on the AEW figures, I just take like hand sanitizer on a paper towel and just sort of prep each window ahead of time. And I always here's the sad thing. I personally prefer the way Sharpie looks on figures than I do Decos. To me, the edges on like a Sharpie signature on plastic look smoother than a Deco edge. The Deco edge, at least with Deco mediums, will look sometimes a little, not jagged, but it's not always a straight, smooth line. But
it feathers a little bit.
Yeah, it feathers. But with the new Sharpie blend now, I'm going to have to get used to it, I guess.
Yeah. There's no other way to it. So there's this the fact that we were able to talk for 40 minutes about pens is kind of crazy. But I guess the larger point is if you're investing a lot of time and money and energy into your collection, then think about and care about the pens that you use and keep up with the pen world, because I can only imagine someone who's just going on their merry way, happily buying the Sharpie paint pens, thinking that everything's still the same. They go and they get a new package and think, oh, wait a second, everything is different, and I'm not getting what I usually get. And so one of the things I recommend, if you're at New York Comic Con or you're at one of the major cons, Uchida, the company that puts out Deco Color, they have a booth. Stop by, talk to the salesman, play with their products and use the samples. I believe you go to craft stores like Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Joann's Fabric, they have samples of Sharpie pens and other kinds of pens out. Play with them, use them, try them out, and see what you like, and make sure that you're using something that it can be preserved.
Yeah, I mean, as we've discussed, there's a lot of choice. There's some choice that we feel is fact, that you can't go the other way, but people do. Just be informed of whatever you're choosing. If you like the richness of Posca, be aware that it can chip. Be aware of how to prevent that from happening. Just enter into whatever choice you make from an educated basis, that you know exactly what you're doing and how to protect it.
That's it for pens. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. If you're inclined, leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And you can also leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. You can leave comments on YouTube. You can also leave thumbs up and thumbs down on YouTube. We'll take all the engagement we can get. So what's coming up for us?
A whole lot of WWE ID talent. That's what's coming up.
It seems like every time I talk to you, we have another one in the pipeline.
Yup. We this week added Brad Baylor, who is someone, again, that was on our list for my messages with him go back to last year. And now, we're finally able to hammer down like a date. We had another guy, actually, he followed us from the ID list, and we've been talking to him, and we're trying to work on that. Just, we're waiting for his schedule in the new year to be sent to us, and then we'll figure out a time. And we also have currently scheduled Zeta Steele, Jackson Drake, and Marcus Mathers. These items are due January 24th, and we will be handling all those talents at the PWJ show we mentioned earlier. And we also have talent not yet on the ID list, such as Charles Mason, Brittany Brooks, and Emily J, also due January 24th. And I had a customer reach out the other day, and they wanted the Charles Mason WWE ID promo. And I had to let them know that we're only offering those red and black shots on people currently on the ID list. And that's one of those things where I'm sure once these people are added to the ID list after the signing, I'll kick myself and be annoyed that I didn't get them done preemptively. But to keep the ID shots, and I think we're in agreement on this, to keep them special, to keep them meaningful, we can't get people on them until they're signed.
Couldn't have said it better. And so, we have Brad Baylor's coming up. We don't have an exact date, but the pre-orders are already up. Again, Zeta Steele, Jackson Drake, Marcus Mathers, those are all due January 24th. And is that right?
That's right, January 24th.
And then our non-ID people, Charles Mason, Brittany Brooks, and Emily J, are also due January 4th. So I guess that's it for us. If you want to, if you're shopping for autographs, check out www.markedoutcollectibles.com or our eBay store at Marked Out Collectibles. To contact us for any reason, please email markedoutcollectibles@gmail.com or join the Marked Out Collectibles official marketplace on Facebook. So for markedout.com, Marked Out Collectibles, and Marked Out Radio, I'm Sean.
I'm Dana.
And we'll see you next week.